I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Ginny Kochis. Ginny writes books for the unique and unrepeatable, for teens and adults who don't quite fit the mold. She tells stories about love, friendship, faith, and family starring differently wired characters. Since 2006, Ginny has supported Christian families raising differently wired children through her online community, So Formulaic. She has been a contributing writer for Fat Brain Toys, The Mighty, Catholic Mom, and GHF. A former high school English teacher and adjunct professor of developmental English, Ginny has over 20 years of experience teaching writing and literature. While Ginny lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 3 children, she's happiest on the shores of the Neuse River. All she needs is her family splashing around in the water and a good book in her hand. Blink and We'll Miss It is her fictional debut. Welcome to the show, Ginny.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, we have your lovely bio here, but I feel like we're so much more than that. So can you tell us a little bit more about who you are?
I have 3 kids. I think that was probably in my bio, but anyway, no, each one of them has his or her own quirk. They're all 3 of them are twice exceptional. So they're intellectually gifted, but also they have developmental or learning differences. So my oldest, she is 16. She's autistic. I guess the buzzword now would be high functioning, but I don't like that term. She's one of those kids where if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. So that's been a journey, getting her there. And then my 2 younger, a 12-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy, and they have anxiety and OCD, and probably ADHD, but we haven't had those diagnosed yet. So, they come by it honestly. They come from a long line of smart, creative, quirky people. My husband is super brilliant. I mean, I'm okay. I'm probably the least intelligent person in the house. But yeah, it's fun. It's always busy. There's never a dull moment for sure. And yeah, I am a reader. I love reading. I love exercising. That's kind of like my therapy.
I feel you on that one.
Getting up in the morning and working out. Yeah. And then I'm definitely a beach person. My mother's family is from a small town in North Carolina called Minnesota Beach. Well, Arapahoe is like the greater town, and then Minnesota Beach is like this little hamlet within it. And so I spent my summers I spent my summers basically living there, because my family would go down and stay in this little house that my grandmother had built in the 1950s. And so, my family history there goes back to like the 17th century. So one summer, I think the summer I was 10, I got really fascinated by the whole family tree down there. So I spent years just kind of combing through the genealogy, and my family, my great-great-grandfather had like 15 kids. So the area is populated. I mean, the area is populated with my family. So I have all kinds of like distant relatives and cousins down there. So that's me. I mean, my husband's from Texas.
Okay.
My dad is from Texas originally. My mom's from North Carolina. So I live outside DC, but I'm a Southern girl, I think, at heart.
Well, I have found that that's so impressive as you're talking, that as a 10-year-old, you were so interested in your family tree, because now, as I'm older and I don't have, some of my older family members are not around anymore. And I'm like, well, I have some of these questions about our family tree, but who do I talk to about it? So I'm so impressed that as a 10-year-old, I wish I had had that foresight, right? Like as a 10-year-old, like, no, ask the questions why these people are still here.
I think because that side of my family is so huge there. I'm lucky in that, like, I'm looking over on my bookshelf, there's this huge compendium of my family tree. It's like this, it's about probably
Wow.
4 inches thick. And it's just everybody who was in that branch of the family. Like, and it was put together probably in the late 70s, early 80s. So it has the listing of
Yeah.
everybody all the way back from the first guy who came over here. So I guess in that sense, it
Wow.
was a little easier for me because the area itself, and I kind of wrote this into my book, like the area itself, if you're born there, you kind of stay there. And
Okay.
you know, and your kids, you know, stay there. You know, with the exception of my mother, you know, my mom did leave. You know, and in Blink and We'll Miss It, you know, the main characters, her mom leaves too. So I guess it was easier for me in that sense. It was all right there just for the picking. I didn't really have to do that much digging. So,
Well, and I also love the first part of what you talked about of just finding the right terminology of how you want to describe. And I love your aspect of the differently wired children, right?
oh,
Um,
yeah.
and just that we're all made how we are and we're all beautiful people,
Right.
right? And like sometimes there can be such negative connotations around the terminology that might be there. So I
Absolutely.
really think it's beautiful what you're doing of, really
Oh, thank you.
between your book that you've written and now I've kind of explored your website a little bit. And just I think it's amazing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks. It's important to me. I think one of the things about that I discovered, you know, as I was researching my family history is the history of mental illness
Yeah.
that came down through the line, especially my grandmother and her three sisters. Each one of them had their own little quirk, and probably today they would have been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, um, definitely some OCD. But I had my one my one great aunt, she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and I wanted actually to name our oldest after her, but you know the reaction in the family was like, no, you really can't. And I started to question, like, why?
Yeah.
And it was because you know everybody thought of her as kind of, you know, this crazy old lady who was convinced everybody was trying to kill her, and um, she got in a car accident and was convinced that somebody had cut her brake lines, which wasn't the case. She actually, you know, she was married. She ended up divorcing and then was in an institution for a while. And my heart kind of always hurt for her because um, she was such a beautiful woman, you know. And I've seen pictures of her, but nobody talks about her.
Yeah.
And just I think that kind of brought home the whole, like, well, I have children who are just, you know, who are similar to these women who came before me, you know, and I don't want them ever to be viewed as not good enough, or I don't want them to view themselves as not good enough. So
Yeah.
I think that became the impetus for really starting that part of what I do, the whole, you know, differently wired community. Of just embracing the way our brains are made, and knowing that, you know, because they were made that way from the beginning, they're good. And
Yeah.
you know, we're not in spite of, but because of, you know, we are who we are because of the way we were made, not in
Mhm.
spite of it.
And I think broadly too, like the way that message is hitting me is they could be completely just misunderstood, right? And for them, this is how we're wired. We are all
Sure.
wired differently, really, right? But
Right,
as
right.
like as
Hmm.
these terms of these societal terms, maybe, or
Right.
the history of mental illness, that it could, that negative connotation that can go around that can be so misunderstood, right? And maybe even like
Yes.
dismissed.
Right,
Like you
right.
hear that and you just dismiss this person, and that's
Yeah, and you just write them off, which you
yeah,
wouldn't do if somebody told you they had diabetes, because, you know, to me, it's very similar. You know, diabetics, type 1 diabetics, especially, take insulin, you know, to help because their bodies, you know, regulate their blood sugar levels because their pancreas doesn't make enough insulin. Well,
yeah,
you know, in my family, our brains don't make enough serotonin. So, you know, we take medication to
yeah.
help replace, you know, what our brains don't make. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know,
No,
the way the body is made. So, yeah, I think there is a stigma. There's not as much of a stigma as there used to be.
yeah,
I think, fortunately, I think mental health awareness has come a long way. I don't know that I would say that our country's, like, our medical system's ability to handle it has quite caught up.
Yeah.
Especially with the pandemic, waiting lists for therapists and all of that kind of stuff are still so astronomically long. I do think it's important, to make sure that, that stigma continues to be lessened, and that people are allowed to love themselves for who they are. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. My husband is in the military, and he was a physical therapist as well. I know I had mentioned that
mhm.
to you, but he said, like, the wait list for the mental health providers where he works, it's just out of
Yeah,
control, right? And the
yeah,
wait lists. And so it's, while it's great we have awareness now, we really need to improve the access to care, I think, for
yeah. I
these,
agree.
for those that need it. So
I agree.
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your Blink When You Miss It. I read that, and I think I don't know at what mark of the book I was reading it on my Kindle, but I couldn't put it down. It just became like, I have to know what's going to happen.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm
so
glad that you enjoyed it.
I loved it. So, can you tell us a little bit about the book and tell our, the listeners, a little
Yeah.
background on it?
Yeah. So this always trips me up because I'm like, people are like, tell me about your book. And then I'm suddenly like, I can't ever think about how to, I mean, because you spend all these years writing it and it's this huge thing. And then all of a sudden you have to condense it down into this little blurb. Essentially it's the story of a girl who learns to love who she truly is, and the abilities that she has, and the quirks that make her and her mother who they are, through the help of her friends and her family. There are there's an element of magical realism to it. She has what she calls blinks, which are moments where she just kind of slips into the past, not as an active participant but as an observer, where she's able to see things that have occurred in the spaces where she is in the present, in the past. So she has moments where she sees her ancestors, interacting with one another. She gets glimpses of her mother as a teen, and at first, it's clear to her like when she's having these moments, but then as the book goes on, reality and those moments start to blend, and it's hard for her to tell exactly what's going on until she's right in the middle of it. But she's from her mother's bipolar, a kind of an untreated bipolar. And she's spent most of her childhood, she's 17, kind of raising her mom. So it's in reverse, really. And her mom has a pretty much a psychotic break, and she ends up back in the small town where her mom grew up, with her grandparents, and seeing again for the first time some friends that she had developed when they lived there previously, who she just completely broke off all contact with because she had started to have these blinks, and she was afraid that she was also losing her mind like her mother. So when she returns to this small town, Minnesota, she has to deal not only with her mother being in the hospital, but also with the friends she left behind and the broken relationships there. She has to deal with that her grandfather's expectations for her, her own sort of fears around what's happening to her, and then there's some family secrets that come to light. So yeah, it's a lot. Like I said, it took me probably about 3 years to write, and there were many, many rewrites where I was like, no, this isn't working, I'm scrapping this and starting over.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, so but it's definitely, it's a labor of love, and it's it's a love letter, I think, to my family history, to my mom, to my grandmother, to her sisters, to that town, because I do, I really love that place, with all my heart. So the book is special to me. And I've been really pleased by the response I've been getting. The reviews have been phenomenal. And the book was featured in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette as a cool summer
Yay.
read pick. And I don't even know
Yeah.
anybody in Pittsburgh. So I was like, wow.
This
People
feels good.
outside my yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's that validation of like people you don't, I mean, because you write a book and you're an indie publisher, and then you tell your friends and your friends read it and it's like yay. But then when people who you don't know at all read the book, and then like not only that, they write it up in a newspaper, like a major newspaper, that's like wow, huge. So
That has to be
um
such a cool feeling.
I was on cloud nine for a couple of days for sure.
Yeah.
um so
Yeah, it's a beautiful read, listeners. It's called Blink and You'll Miss It, or Blink and Will Miss It, excuse me.
yeah. Oh, that's okay.
And so you should totally pick it up. It actually it's a young adult book, correct?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, well, because the protagonist, she's 17.
Yeah.
But I think, somebody described it as kind of living in that space between young adult literature and women's fiction, which I
Okay.
think is, I think that's a fair comparison. There is a romance, but it's definitely a clean romance. So because I wanted to write something that I felt comfortable letting my daughters read.
Yeah.
So I made sure that that was appropriate. And my daughter, she actually did the cover illustration for me, so that makes it extra special, I think, because my daughter's an artist.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Listeners, like you have to go, even if you're like, I don't know that I'll read it, but go
Yeah.
look at the cover. It's so
Thanks.
beautiful.
Thanks. You're proud of her.
um, as far as the book, I loved the themes of what you're saying of how the people in the story rallied around her just to show her that they loved her for who she was. And that she, that fear that she was having about, maybe she was going to be having the psychotic break like her mom, and just how they rallied around her to show her they loved her for who they were, or for who she was. And almost had some transformational stories themselves. I thought that was very beautiful.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the, I think, the unconditional love, the reality of what it really means to forgive someone, not just her friends forgiving her, but also May, my main character, being able to like forgive her mother, forgive herself, forgive her grandfather ultimately, for some things that occurred, and just learning what it really means to be human, and to accept who we are. And I wrote this specifically for kids, and adults who have always sort of felt on the margins and not really like they were welcome anywhere, or just kind of sort of an out of the box thinkers who don't always feel like they fit in.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to show a young woman who can identify with that, but then ultimately just learns to be at home with herself and with her family, even with all their quirks and difficulties, and with her mother's illness. That was important to me, to be able to let my readers know that they're not alone. So
yeah, I think that is such a hard part
yeah,
of the teenage years, right? Of you're not quite at home or confident in who you are as a person yet, and so grappling with where you're going to fit in this world.
Yeah.
Right. And which I feel like now that I'm older, I don't care as much about fitting in, right? Because I'm more confident in who I am, but it's a journey.
It is, for sure. Especially when you add in, being differently wired, because you're acutely aware that you're not like everybody else, or the standard typical teen, and that makes an already, I mean, teens already feel like they're not like everybody else, but then, you add in ADHD, you add in anxiety, you add in autism, you add in even just giftedness, and some of the things that come along with being super, super smart. Like, then you're even more aware of the fact that you really are not like everybody else. And that can be really devastating. So, yeah, it's important for me.
Well, now we have this beautiful book in the world to help.
Yeah, that's my hope.
These, like you said, feel like they're not alone.
Yeah,
out there too. I think that's being human, right? It's just sometimes hearing you are not alone in your thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, did you learn anything about yourself as you wrote this book?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the book is dedicated actually to my therapist, who I finally, I mean, because I've been on medication for years, but I didn't start seeing a therapist until the pandemic because I was like, I cannot function. I need help with this, with all the
Yeah.
things that I'm feeling. So I found a therapist and started seeing her, and I'm what I call a lazy perfectionist, which I think is part of, um, I'm diagnosed as having generalized anxiety disorder, and I'm diagnosed as having depression. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm pretty sure I have it, because of that whole lazy perfectionism. Like I have that whole avoidance thing down. I want everything to be perfect, but I'm afraid of doing the work to get there, or I get hyper fixated on one specific aspect of what I'm doing, and then I can't let it go. And I was doing that with the book. I was writing. I'd write like 3 chapters, and then I'd start over from the beginning and I'd rewrite them. And then I'd get maybe another chapter in,
Okay.
and then I'd have to start over and go back and rewrite from the beginning. And I was getting absolutely nowhere, and I was spinning my wheels. And the truth of the matter is, this book has been in my head for probably 20 years or so. And I'd written,
Wow.
when I was in graduate school, I'd written like an initial iteration of it. But that totally, I mean, it totally became something different. But my therapist was like, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to take small steps to get you to move forward, because at the time, we were switching from homeschooling. We'd been homeschooling for like 8 years to putting the kids in school. And I was even avoiding like going online and filling out the forms. I mean, there was this whole like circle of avoidance with everything. And this constant refrain of, I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, I'm worthless. So we did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. But
Okay.
she had me like set little miniature goals for myself. And with the writing, one of those goals was to write for, X amount of time, and then without stopping, without rereading what I'd written, just writing and getting it done, and then putting it away, and then coming back the next day and picking up where I left off, not rereading what I had done.
Okay.
And which is funny
Okay.
because, as a writing teacher, that's advice that I gave my students all the time. But somehow it didn't apply to me, like, because I was above that.
We're our own worst enemies
Yes.
sometimes, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. I thought, I should be able to just sit down and make this perfect from the get-go. And that is not at all how writing works. It doesn't work that way. So, I learned a lot about my ability to overcome my fears, my ability to overcome my perfectionism. Um, I look back at the book sometimes. I'll pick up and reread a section or something, and I don't even remember writing the words, which is strange to me. But I
Wow.
think that's because I I don't know if I just got into, like, the story just started to flow eventually once I let go of all of the
Okay.
things I was afraid of. And when I wasn't trying to fine tune it all from the get go, from the start, um, the characters just became real in my head. And it was so much easier to write them when I didn't have a chokehold on what I was trying to do. Um, and I
Yeah.
notice, I'm working on a prequel actually to it right now. And it's the same process. Like, I have to remind myself, this doesn't have to be perfect from the start. Like, I don't need to have a chokehold on this. I just need to tell Nathan and DeWitt's story, um, and let them be who they are. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think that's a testament of your strength, right? And just your perseverance to
Oh,
overcome
thanks.
all of you were internally battling, right? And I
Yeah,
think this all the time of books that I read that I can only imagine this is like birthing another baby into this
it
world,
is.
right? Like you're putting your thoughts, tears, like
Yeah,
love, all of what you have into these stories, and you're releasing that publicly
yeah.
for others to
It's
read.
scary.
And so I think, yeah, that is really admirable. And I don't watch much TV, so writers are like my
Yeah.
heroes, which is why we're here with a book podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's
Oh,
incredible.
thank you. Thanks.
So kudos to you.
Thanks.
Do you have anything that you wish that you would have known when you started? Like knowing everything you know now about writing this book, if you
Gosh.
could go back and tell yourself. one thing.
Um, I think that the reality that it would get finished, and that it would get out there, and that it would, even if, it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. You know,
Yeah.
um, books are not supposed to be like, nothing is supposed to be universally liked by everyone. I mean, that's just not how, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we have different tastes in music, different styles of music. That's why there's different forms of dance and art, because we all have art that speaks to us in different ways. So, I think I was so afraid of, people not liking it, but, I think I would tell myself that doesn't matter, and what matters is,
Yeah.
the people who needed this book are the ones who are going to read it, and the ones who are going to enjoy it, and the ones who are going to draw something from it. So, and that's what matters most.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The last quote I gave in the show is along the lines of like, a, a book comes into our life when we most need
Mm-hmm.
it. And I truly believe
Yeah.
that, right? And we could sit here and say that's God doing
Right.
that,
Right.
right? It's directing, he's landing this book in our
Sure.
lap for the moment that we need to hear that
Sure.
message that comes from this book. And so I think the same thing, right? Of even if there's a book maybe I read that I don't
Mm-hmm.
love from the outset, I'm like, this maybe just isn't the season of my life to read this. And so that doesn't mean it's not going to work for me. It just maybe doesn't work for me right
Right.
now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree 100%. And that's a good point, is that, what we need kind of changes, along with our tastes, and our
Yeah.
interests as we grow and change as people. So,
So now that your book is out in the world, do you have any upcoming events or things you're doing with the book?
um, that's I think I'm just trying to um survive right now. Like, I haven't planned any book signings or anything like that. Although I do have um I do have I have some friends who are opening a bookstore. So my hope is that they
Yay.
will, invite me for reading. I think they will, most likely. Um, so, or even just, like a signing or something like that. And then I kind of, I think I let my anxiety get the best of me on this one. Is that, I had approached, our local library has signings for local authors, and I, contacted them and expressed interest, but then I kind of dropped the ball because I was like, I don't know, what if no one shows up? So I have to get over that hurdle. I
Yeah.
guess like my plans next are to just, get over my fear of showing up. So those are my plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, is to work on my anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that is so natural though. Even with this podcast, when I started reaching out to authors to come on the show, like I had to have this whole, like, I don't know, couple weeks where I went through like, they might not respond and
Yes.
that's okay, right?
Yes.
Like I had to get over that, like I might be rejected
Right.
or I might not hear from anybody. And I
Right.
think that that is completely natural as human, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to not take it personal, right? Like that
Right.
was like what I had to talk myself into is it's not
It's not
personal.
personal. Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And not everything is about me either. Like, I have to I think we have or at least I have a tendency to like view the world through like everybody is, well, if people don't show up, it's because they don't like me, or this, that, or the other. But in the reality of it, like that's not true at all. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with,
Yeah.
what their own schedules are, or, even if they don't know me at all, they can't not like me because they haven't met me. Maybe they just didn't hear about the event.
Yeah.
Like, my brain has to, I have to control my brain from taking like ridiculous leaps that, my
Yeah.
imagination sometimes runs away with me, I think.
Well, I hope you get there and
Thank
hope you
you.
can, talk yourself off. But I know I have 100% been there myself, so
Yeah.
I know it's something to work through.
Right.
um, well, let's switch gears a little bit
Okay.
then, and let's talk a little bit about who you are as a reader
Okay.
and what type of books you enjoy reading.
I really love character driven stories. Those have always been, I think, kind of what I've been drawn to. I mean, and of course, like I love stories that have a good plot, but I feel like, and this is kind of the perspective I take with my own writing. I feel like, the characters' beliefs about themselves and the journey that those characters go on, that is, intricately entwined. I don't know if that even makes sense, but it's connected. It's interconnected with the plot itself. So,
Yeah.
which is essentially what a character-driven, storyline is. So, um, I tend to gravitate toward those kinds of books.
If you had a book that you didn't like the character,
Mhm.
does that turn you away from the book or do you still stick with it?
I think you can have an unlikable character, um, and still see the value in that character's growth and development. Um,
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite authors, Emily Henry, she once talked about,
Yeah.
in her book People We Meet on Vacation. I think she was worried.
Okay.
I read an interview. She was worried about how people would receive Poppy, because she was kind of unlikable. But I think a lot of us are unlikable, in our most raw, most vulnerable form, because we all come with baggage. We all come with these things that impact who we are. So I think a character can be unlikable and still be someone that you root for. Like even like if you go back to classic literature, like Sidney Carton, from A Tale of Two Cities, really unlikable character. I mean, the guy's a loser. He's a drunk. He doesn't see himself as worth anything. He's brilliant, but he's wasting his talents. He's an unlikable jerk of a guy. But
Yeah.
as the story goes on, you see him grow and change. And by the end, like when he I don't know if this is a huge spoiler or not, but he ends up sacrificing his life for the woman that he loves, who he knows he's not worthy of, or he feels he's not worthy of. But he can't have her anyway because she's already married to somebody else. But he gives up his life for her, so that she can have a full, happy life, with her husband. And you're at least I was crying, and when I used to teach it in the
Yeah.
classroom, I taught it to ninth graders. Like even the boys would get a little like choked up because here's this guy that you really hated, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, you're such a wonderful person. So I think the short answer is yes. If there's an unlikable character, I will keep reading because, invariably, if the book is well written, um, you're going to see a shift and a change to make that
Yeah.
character more relatable, or somebody that you can empathize with. Um, and in fact, I just read there was a YA book I read a couple of months ago, Lola at Last by J.C. Cervantes. And I really could not stand Lola for like the first third of the book. I was like, I don't know if I can get through this. She is so selfish and self-absorbed and vapid, vapid. I can't even
Yeah.
say the word right. Um, but then there was that moment where she like the light bulb went on and she changed, and it didn't happen overnight. There was like this gradual shift. But it's one of the best books I've ever read. So, I think
Wow.
I think it's worth it to stick it out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then I think I interrupted you, or you were going to tell me your go-to genre.
When I was younger, I was really into mysteries. Well, growing up, I was into like Mary Downing Hahn and all the ghost stories, and then I shifted into
Yeah.
mysteries, especially like cozy murder mysteries, and then thrillers. And then I stopped reading once I had kids, and it was like, I don't really have time for any of this that is not child related. So, but then when I started my blog, I got back into it a little bit. But I think what really pushed me back into reading was the start of the pandemic, and I started reading, believe it or not, romance, because I was like, I need some light and like beauty and
Yeah.
fun. I need some happiness.
Yep.
So I really got into the romance genre. And then from that, I started reading like some YA, like contemporary YA romance. And I found that I really enjoyed it, even though I was reading about teenagers and I'm a grown adult. I think there's so much in YA literature that is still valuable. It
Yeah.
reminds us of who we were, of who we've become. And then I find that YA books tend to be more character driven. And
Okay.
since I like character driven stories, I think I gravitate toward them. So, and I think that's why I ended up, because my book started out being an adult novel. And then the more I wrote May, it was supposed to be like her story as an adult with flashbacks to her, like her youth. But the more I wrote her
Okay.
as a teen, the more I was like, I really like this voice. I wasn't really vibing, I guess, with the adult voice that I had for her.
I think that as readers, it's very hard to pick one genre
Yeah,
of
yeah,
books that we read, right?
that's
Because,
true.
like you said, we change
Yeah,
over time and in different seasons of life, things will speak to us differently. So I think that is definitely not a short answer,
yeah,
like question normally. But you have also so graciously prepared a book flight for us today.
yes,
Can you
yes.
tell us a little bit, maybe how they pair together or how you chose these three books?
Sure. So, because of my own history of, mental health issues and my family's mental health issues, I tend to gravitate toward books that portray, mental health issues in a positive light, especially, as a YA author, from a YA perspective. So, I chose three young adult novels. And then the first one is This Might Get Awkward by Kara McDowell. And she is one of my favorite YA authors. She's she also has her own struggles, with anxiety, and so each one of her books has some element of that in it. And in This Might Get Awkward, the main character Gemma has major social anxiety. She just doesn't like to be around
Okay.
other people, so she goes to the beach one afternoon before school starts just to be by herself, only to find out that like all the popular kids from school are there. And yeah,
Oh no.
before she can and she gets she goes into the bathroom to change or something, I don't know, and she comes back and like all the kids cars have like parked around hers, so she can't even get out of the parking lot, so she's stuck. And to make matters worse, this boy that she's been crushing on for years comes up and starts like talking to her, which A is she's never, she never would have expected, and then B, he's like, look, I need you to do me a favor, I need you to pretend like we're really close. And then he grabs her, puts his arm around her, takes a photo with the two of them together, and then it's like, hey, thank you so much. And then he like walks off. Well, while she's standing there thinking, what the heck just happened, and trying to control her breathing and not throw up because of the social anxiety piece, she sees him slip and fall from a boat into the water, hit his head, and not come back up, and nobody notices except for her. So
Wow.
she waits and she waits and she waits, and she's like, isn't anybody going to see him? Oh my gosh, where did he go? Finally, she just dives in the water, goes down there, finds him, pulls him up, and then suddenly, not only is she a hero, but he had posted their photo to Instagram, and so everybody thinks that they're
Okay.
dating. So then it becomes this huge thing where like the news media wants to get involved, and her family thinks they're dating, and she keeps trying to tell people that that's not the truth, but the more, outside forces get involved, the more difficult it is for her to tell the truth because she's so anxious. Basically, suddenly she's got this, this boyfriend, this popular life, but she really hates it, and she can't figure out like how to get herself out of the situation. So, um,
Oh my gosh. As
yeah,
you're talking, I can like almost feel like that anxiety
yeah,
that she feels as
yeah.
you're saying that.
Um, so she
Um,
does learn how to conquer it, and that's why I think it's great, because it's, it's helping anxious kids see that, yes, this moment in and of itself is horrific, and it feels like it's going to last forever, but it doesn't. You can get past it, you
yeah.
can learn to manage this and be okay. um
Okay.
so
Well, that sounds even like it would be a really great summer read
yes, it
as
is,
well.
it's definitely a summer read.
Okay.
And then there's The Unlikely Hero of Room 13B by Teresa Totten. And so Adam Spencer Ross meets Robin Plummer in his young adult OCD support group. They both have OCD. And he
Okay.
is like totally drawn to her. And he um, really just kind of falls for her right then and there. But she's just been released from a residential psychiatric program. Um, and he feels like he has to save her kind of from herself, from relapsing. And in the blurb it says, he's got to save Robin or die trying. But then the question is,
Okay.
is it really Robin who needs rescuing? And is it possible to have a normal relationship when your life is anything but? Because the whole thing is, his OCD impacts every single aspect of his life, and not only that, like his mother's been getting these threatening letters in the mail. She's a single mom. His dad has a new family. Well, he's remarried. They have a son who Adam is beginning to notice is exhibiting very similar characteristics and symptoms to the ones that he has. And so he feels like, oh my gosh, I've got to protect this little kid from becoming me. So he's got this. I mean, one of the things that people don't understand about OCD is the idea of intrusive thoughts and the compulsions. It's not always about like washing your hands 50 times over or being afraid of germs. It's about, these fixations that you can't let go of. And so, Robin and his little brother and everything that's going on with his mom, those become fixations. But it's a beautiful story and I love it. And the author wrote it after she attended some kind of, I forget what it was. She heard a young man with OCD give a presentation about his experiences and his struggles. And then after that, she was very inspired to write this novel. So it's a good book.
It sounds like, I love the part where you flip it of like, well, who really needed the saving, right? Like he kind of started fixating on it. He needed to save her. And then it became this story of, well, who really needs the saving? And wow, that sounds it's a good really book. Great.
Yeah. And then there's Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. And so in this story, Eliza is very shy. She's kind of weird. She's friendless. She wears like shapeless clothing. And honestly, as I was reading, I kind of wondered if maybe she is autistic because she has like various or really specific food preferences. She's not a fan of like sensory stimulation, like really gets to her. When she's online, she's Lady Constellation, who is this anonymous creator of a really popular webcomic called Monstrous Sea. Okay. And so she has like millions of fans. She's actually made a ton of money off of merchandise and all this kind of stuff. And she can't imagine actually enjoying the real world as much as she enjoys her online world. Except this new kid transfers into the school and his name is Wallace. And as the more she gets to know Wallace, the more she begins to wonder if life might be worthwhile living offline. But then her secret, the fact that she is this creator of the webcomic accidentally gets revealed. And she starts to kind of lose her grip on reality because she becomes very anxious about the fact that, people are seeing her, that people are talking to her. And she's not even really sure that she can continue to be on this planet. She starts to entertain thoughts of suicide. So the story is about how, she comes to recognize that she can be the same person that she is online as she is like in real life. And it's a very heavy topic. But the way the author writes, and she includes like illustrations from the webcomic because the author herself is also an illustrator. And then she's got, screenshots from like her online community. And there's a lot of like subtle humor. So it's heavy, but it's not the kind of book that makes you want to like go jump off a cliff when you're done. You leave with a sense of hope. It has a happy ending. And both she and Wallace are able to kind of to battle their monsters, into submission. Because Wallace has his own baggage. So I read it a couple of weeks ago and I had to sit with it for a while to kind of let it sink in. And I would recommend that one probably for older teens and adults. Okay. I think just because of there are themes of suicide and self-harm in my own book. But I think it's important to make sure the kids are in a good place, when they read it, because
sure,
yeah. So anyway, but those are my 3 books. So
awesome. And then the other 2, they're also young adult books.
They are
as well.
Yeah.
Correct?
All 3 of them are young adult. And I chose them just because since mine is young adult, I wanted to, pair them with something that went along with my book in genre and topic. So
yeah. And I love that because I think it's all in the same theme of just being human,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so
Sure.
much for those 3 books. And listeners, I'll have all those in the show
Okay.
notes. And then how I like to end our show actually is with what I call our bonus
Okay.
pairings, which are just a speed round of
Okay.
questions. So you can answer these really
Okay.
quick. Are you a rereader?
I am. Yes. Yeah. If a book really impacts me emotionally, then yes, I will.
What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Oh gosh, so many. That's a tough one. Probably, I mean, A Tale of Two Cities, probably, which is so bizarre to say.
Okay.
Because people are like, Charles Dickens, what? But it's the least Dickensian of all his novels. And I think the message really hit home to me. I think of, the idea of personal sacrifice, the true meaning of love, what it means to really love someone and love them enough to want to um, give them everything that you have, including your own life. Because before I had kids, and even still in the early years of having kids, I was kind of a selfish person. I think most of us are. I think when we're younger, we tend to be, more on the selfish side, whether, we end up having kids or not. I think it's just part of being young, being in your early 20s. And that book really kind of like was a sea change for me about the way I saw life and how I loved the people in my life. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
yeah,
I
thanks.
love that. I have never read that one.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, it's worth it.
you're inspiring me.
Yeah, no, I mean, book 1 is a little slow. But books 2 and 3 are, they definitely pick up, and it's good. It's a good read.
Okay. And then where is your favorite place to read?
Probably on our back porch, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a nice, covered back porch area, and the wind. I don't know if it's like where we are geographically, but there's like this constant breeze that just kind of runs through the backyard.
Nice.
Yeah, it's lovely. So that it's nice. Yeah.
Okay. And then last question, what are you reading next?
I think on actually Karen McDowell's book, new book, The Prince and the Apocalypse, just came out. So
Okay.
that is on my list. As well as there's a new Katie Birchall book that's on my Kindle currently. But I think The Prince and the Apocalypse is next. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right. And I guess I said one last question, but this is more logistics.
Okay.
So if people want to find out more about you, how can they find you? And where would you like them to reach out?
Yeah. You can find me at www.ginnykochis.com, which is my website.
Okay.
So it's ginnykochis.com. And that's got all the information of like, who I am and how to get in touch with me, where to find my books. Everything's there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely have a link for that in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious, and so I appreciate all you've given me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Ginny Kochis and her book flight featuring differently wired characters. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.